This farmyard barn is a shrine to fire engines. Barry has over the years built up a unique collection of machines which are his pride and joy. But how did it all start?
This machine here was actually my downfall. I had never been interested in the fire brigade, but when I started going to work I used to pass a fire station, and this was the machine that they had inside. I thought it was unusual because it had the 2 chrome bells up at the top, and one day they were washing the machine outside, and for whatever reason I just stopped. And I said, "What happens to your old fire engines?" And they said, "Oh well, they get sold at auction." And so I offered, I think, £505. And a few weeks later they said, "Come and take it away." And of course it was a bit of a problem then because I had nowhere to keep it. So first I took it to my mum's house, parked it in her drive, and there it stood. And then my mum started to get all sorts of funny people knocking on the door, saying they were fire engine enthusiasts and they had fire engines and could they have a look around it. And at that time I had no knowledge that there were such things as fire engine collectors. And so that was the start. I suppose my interests are mixed. First of all, looking at a vehicle in itself, you can actually do something with it. I mean, you can have an old lorry, you can only drive it somewhere. But with a fire engine, you can actually do something with it. You can find some water, you can squirt water, play it being a little boy. It's that sort of thing. But also, you've probably noticed that most of my machines are Dennis fire engines, and I'm particularly interested in the history of the Dennis company and how they've been at the forefront of fire engine design right from 1908 right through to the present day. And you look at their old machines and you can see that they were purpose designed fire engines rather than converted lorries, that throughout the whole history they've been specialist vehicle makers, and they really are just wonderful. What more can I say? It's interesting that no matter how many times you've donged a fire engine bell, you still can't resist it. This is a Dennis Big 6 machine, and I've been interested in it for a long time. It was up for sale perhaps about 15 years ago, and I was interested in it then, but I thought, well, I've got 10 fire engines, you know, another one would just be too many. And so I left it, and finally it came up for sale about a year ago. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I gave it a miss 10 years ago. I shouldn't give it a miss now, even though now I had 22 machines, which was in the far... but anyway, I ended up buying it. This engine is a 6-cylinder engine. It's 6 litres. And what's often confusing is you can see the twin spark plugs per cylinder. And so some people look at it and say, oh yes, a 12-cylinder engine, but really it's only a 6. And over in this area here are the machines which are waiting for some care and attention. This is the Dennis Big 4. It was originally the factory demonstrator. The factory had it for about 6 years before it went to Long Eaton. And whilst it was as the factory demonstrator, it went out on several demonstrations and to shows, and I have a picture here, in fact, of the Duke of Windsor going for a ride in it in the early 1930s. So the Duke actually sat on this very seat here. This machine over here is called the Dennis Light 4, and as a fire engine to collect, it's a very practical machine. It isn't so large as many of them. And also, although it's made in the 1930s, it's a very drivable, easy machine. It's got a good strong engine inside of it, good brakes, just drives like a big car. We've been on the London to Brighton run many times in this one, and you feel you can just get in, drive down to London, drive down to Brighton, come back up north, and it never misses a beat. And that's perhaps a little bit of an exaggeration, as several times it has missed a beat.
This fire engine was originally owned by the Bass Brewery and runs on a secret fuel formula.
It represents the early dawn of motorised appliances. There's about 3 of these machines surviving in the UK. It's got a magnificent engine inside of it. This was the day when steam engine engineering was to the fore, and so you had absolutely huge cylinders inside of it, beautifully made, advanced engineering, aluminium crankcase, aluminium block down, crankcase down here, cast iron cylinder blocks, very nice thin wall castings, and it's got no expense spared, bronze water pump down here for the cooling water. A really lovely engine, a lovely piece of engineering, and no expense was spared when they made it. Beautifully made lights, you have the horn. Over on the other side you've got the officer's foot operated fire bell. One of the intriguing stories about this machine is that because it belonged to the fire brigade at the brewery itself, the machine was manned by the actual brewery workers themselves, and part of the bonus of being in the brewery fire brigade was that they got a beer allowance. And the story goes that to bolster the beer allowance they put an extra crew member down and they called the crew member Dennis. And one day the superintendent came round to examine the men who are on the list of firemen, and he was surprised to see this extra name down called Dennis. And they said that the machine needed its beer ration, and they lifted the radiator cap, poured in a bottle of beer, and said it had excellent lubricating properties and the engine needed its beer ration every week.
Beautifully restored and maintained, these fire engines are more than mere machines. They are living, breathing, working marvels of British engineering.
I give one press of the plunger, and that's putting petrol directly into the inlet manifold. And then we have the self-starting device, which I call Paul, and I say 4 turns please, Paul. The man who used to have this fire engine before me had to give it up because he had a triple heart bypass operation.
So I'll give it 5 just for a look.
Okay, and he just didn't have the strength to turn it over anymore. And so now we can then turn on the continuous stream of sparks, and you hope that one of those sparks is going to catch light on one of the cylinders, and then there's enough momentum to start the engine.
If it's not, we do it all again.
But nothing's happened, so I say 1 more turn please, Paul.
Just a reminder of cards. Turn another one. Turn.
Once you get Barry started on fire engines, well, he just can't stop.
The enjoyment for me, I think, is having something which I've restored well, which works, which expresses how good British engineering was 50 or 60 years ago. Also, it's the enjoyment of using old machines. I mean, certainly with a thing like this, it's more than just a machine. It's something that you put so much of your time and life into. When you're going along with the machine, especially on long runs, that when maybe you're doing 50 or 60 miles a day, you feel part of the machine itself. You're listening to every sound that it makes. You know every noise and every creak. It becomes part of your life. But it is very rewarding. You feel a great sense of achievement when you've been out on it, when you've done a long run with it. You come back, you wash it down, you clean it, and you sort of like pat it and say, you know, well done.